All right, everybody. Welcome to another FDN Fantastic Friday call. I'm really excited this week. It's been a lot of things happening as always, but today I'm excited because Lara Adler is on with us. And in this call, Lara is going to delve into the world of environmental health and the role that, get this, endocrine disrupting chemicals can play in the health challenges that our clients experience. And, this is happening across the board, folks. We all have clients, and actually, we ourselves, FDNs, are not immune to the environment. So I can't wait for her to get going on this. As you know, endocrine disrupting chemicals are ubiquitous, meaning they're everywhere. And my background, as you know, is environmental law, and I studied this for a long time, all the great legal cases around chemicals and what's going on. And, of course, we still have a lot more to understand about it. So Laura's going to bring all that to the table. I'm going to give you a little bit about her background. She's an environmental toxins expert and educator and a certified holistic health coach. And she trains and educates practitioners within the health and wellness community, that means us, to better understand the links between environmental toxins and their impact on disease states. So we know that's a big impact. Anything you guys have going on with your clients, from weight gain all the way through diabetes, fibromyalgia, thyroid disease, whatever it is, developmental disorders in kids. And this is an area where I think, Laura, as I bring you on here in a second, that we really need to spend more time. I think more FDNs should niche kids and start working with kids because, you get the kids and you get the parents at the same time. So I know Laura's very deeply committed to peeling back the curtain of opening up the conversation about environmental toxins, and I'm just going to let her get rolling. So thank you so much, Lara, for being on.
Awesome. Thank you, Reed, for having me. As you know, I'm a huge fan / fellow nerd, and this space, environmental health, is my nerd domain, and I love not only researching and learning about this ongoing for myself, but really do love bringing this to the table for the health practitioner community because it is woefully lacking in the curriculum of the trainings that most practitioners, nearly all practitioners, have. So I'm thrilled to be here.
That's really good. Well, we're going to let you go ahead and start educating us, and I just want everybody to get their pen and paper out. We'll hold off with questions for just a bit. I kind of want to let Laura just get into it, and but you can press number 1 to raise your hand, and also we're going to give you a link, to some really important information. So get your pens and papers ready, folks. Take some notes, have some questions, and jot down some things that Laura's going to be handing out here. Okay? So Laura,
awesome.
Where do you start with this? We find people all the time, and they're not getting better exactly. They're better, but they're not all the way better. So how does environmental toxins fit into all that?
Well, so I think that just like you said, we are all exposed. Environmental exposures are ubiquitous. As practitioners, we are not immune to exposure. And the exposure sources to environmental chemicals are literally everywhere, to the point where it can actually be a little overwhelming for people to think about, which is why I really like to kind of break it down into actionable conversation pieces, because ultimately we can't change everything. But, our exposure sources are literally happening from our food, from our water, from the air that we're breathing outside on the street to the air that we're breathing inside our homes. These chemicals piggyback on the products that we're buying and using every single day, our household cleaners, our personal care products. So, a lot of times when people think of the term environmental toxins or environmental health, they're thinking about it in a really broad scale, meaning air pollution and oil spills and garbage dumps and sort of big, sort of what I consider macro sources of environmental exposures. And those do factor in to individual health impacts. But what I like to focus on, particularly when working with practitioners who are working with clients, are what are the things that we can actually address in a meaningful way that will allow for a meaningful reduction in that exposure level. So in the environmental health space, we talk about body burden of chemicals, meaning what is the actual load that we're carrying of chemicals in our body at any given time. And we all have lead, we all have flame retardants, we all have mercury, we all have pesticides and phthalates and BPA in our bodies just being alive and being on planet Earth. Polar bears in the Arctic, all the way up in the Arctic Circle, have flame retardants in their body fat because these chemicals travel in airstreams and jet streams, and they're just everywhere in the world. And so the aim then is to do what we can to reduce that body burden so that our organ systems are not taxed with trying to manage and process or metabolize these chemicals. So, you know, I think that, generally speaking, is the primary goal here, is for us to reduce, where possible, our body burden. So one of the things that, you know, we talk about in the health and wellness space a lot is detoxing and cleansing, and there's often a, you know, sometimes people will get kickback around, well, why do you need to detox? We all, you know, our bodies already know how to do that. It does that every single day. When we go to the bathroom, when we exhale, we are detoxing, and that's true. But we've come to this point in society, in the world, where the amount of chemicals that we're exposed to is become too much for our body to handle. It's too much. And so this is why we see these rising rates of everything from things like autism, which, you know, the rates for autism are skyrocketing, to birth defects, to rates of fertility dropping around the globe, sperm counts dropping, male and female infertility. We're seeing the rise of things like autoimmune conditions. We're seeing the incidence of cancers increasing. There's almost no health condition out in the world that the environmental toxins don't kind of have their fingers in, is how I like to say it. And so as practitioners, I really just feel that this is the sort of the final frontier of becoming educated and becoming a resource for your clients, is to really be able to understand and to be what I call fluent in the environmental health space, because it's like a foreign language. There's a lot of terms that's different and new, and so what we're trying to develop is a fluency so that we can engage with people and support them in making small but powerful shifts and changes in their everyday lives that can lead to a reduction of this body burden. And as practitioners, you know, especially with your FDN family, your FDN crew, like, they're already doing that work with lifestyle changes and diet changes with their clients. They're already doing that work. So it's just a matter of extending the conversation and being able to support them in this other way.
Yeah, I agree totally. I think you can make an entire career on just this area. It's phenomenal.
Absolutely. And so, you know, it's the other thing that I think is really important, which is why I always love to have this conversation with practitioners, is that awareness in the public about the links between chemicals and consumer products and health impacts is increasing at this exponential rate. I mean, everybody, I'm sure, at this point, unless you've been under a rock, is aware of what's been going on in Flint, Michigan with the lead in the drinking water that's been gaining national attention, national news. It's a huge deal. President Obama had to declare a state of emergency because of the high amounts of lead, a known potent neurotoxin, that was showing up in drinking water. And so what happens is, you know, there's all these news articles that are talking about links between chemicals and cancer and chemicals and weight gain and chemicals and autism and all of these things. And these articles are not discussing any actionable steps for people to actually take. There's no real support around that. So what that results in is a general public that is concerned and worried and anxious, but they don't have anybody to turn to as a resource. There's just nobody who's stuck a flag in the ground and says, this is what I do, and I can help you with that. And that's why I'm so committed to making sure that all practitioners, regardless of modality, whether you're a midwife or a doula or a nutritionist or a yoga instructor, like, it doesn't matter. If you're out there working with the public and health, being a resource for them to this can not only be a way that you can be of service to them, but as from a business standpoint, it really does help practitioners differentiate and distinguish themselves in their field. So,
yep.
So I'd love to, I know that I want to keep us on time, so I'd love to just kind of dive in, if that's okay, and talk about this, space of endocrine disrupting chemicals, because it's such a fundamental, our endocrine system is such a fundamental part of every aspect of our lives, and things that are going to disrupt that are something that...
Yes, please, absolutely. Because this is an undercovered area. It's a huge thing that, like you said, it affects everybody, but I'd like to say it affects some people more than others. For instance, if you live in Flint, Michigan, you got a real... but other big cities, I mean, they stink, and they're rotten for you, and you got to be aware of these things. And then being more aware of what you're going to go over, which is the endocrine disruption, sort of helps you understand what's going on with particular clients, and it gives you things to look for. So please do it. Yeah, let us know.
Yeah. So there's a tremendous amount of chemicals out there that we're exposed to, thousands every single day. Not all of them are endocrine disruptors. However, a large portion and a growing portion of them are, it's being discovered that they are capable of interfering with the endocrine system. We don't have a lot of research on the chemicals that we do have out in commerce. So I'll sort of back up and touch on that just for a second, and I want to explain why I want to back up and talk about this, because this is something that's going to be important for you as you're working with your own clients and patients, is the process of contextualizing the information so that it has a container to sit in, so that the little factoids and nuggets that you share don't just become things that float around in their brain and then they forget about them. So from a context standpoint, we have about 84,000 chemicals that are registered for use in the United States. There's about 1,000 to 2,000 more that are being added every single year because of the really lax chemical policy that we have. The majority of these chemicals are not tested for safety. So of that 84,000, only 200 of them have a sort of robust safety profile. The rest, it's kind of a hodgepodge. And the chemical policy that we have, which is referred to as TSCA, which is the Toxic Substances Control Act, super outdated, hasn't been updated since 1976. It's only managed to ban 5 chemicals since then, in that time, in 38 years, 39 years, 40 years, my God, it's 40 years. Apparently I can't do math. Anyway, so, that's a big part of explaining why we're in this situation in the first place with all of these untested and under-regulated chemicals that we're exposed to. So, like I said, not all of those chemicals are endocrine disruptors. Research into endocrine disrupting chemicals is really gaining a lot of momentum. So in that research, we're finding more and more of these chemicals that we're exposed to every day are turning out to be ones that are capable of disrupting the endocrine system. So what are endocrine disrupting chemicals? They are chemicals. They can be man-made. They're mostly man-made, but they definitely can be natural as well, that interfere with our body's endocrine system. And as you know, the endocrine system really is this sort of master regulator, master thermostat in the body that controls everything from the ability to conceive, to fetal development, to childhood growth and development, to maturation, aging, fertility, metabolism. So all metabolic diseases are regulated by this. The immune system, like every system in the body, is in some way affected by our endocrine system. So it's like the big hog of our bodies. And so endocrine disrupting chemicals are ones that can mimic or block the role that natural hormones like estrogens and androgens and thyroid hormones play in the body. So they can really just kind of go in there into the body once they're in the body and either block natural estrogens or androgens, et cetera, natural hormones from doing what they're supposed to be doing, or it can mimic them and do things that they can possibly do but shouldn't be doing. So they can bind to the respective receptors for those hormones. So in our bodies, we have a finite number of receptors for estrogen or androgen or thyroid hormones. And once those receptor slots are full, then there's no more activity. So, and I'll kind of come back to this concept later, because a big part of the conversation around endocrine disruptors is dosage. And we want to be aware that small doses actually, when it comes to endocrine disruptors, can have greater impact because we have a finite number of receptors. So these endocrine disruptors can interfere or block the body's ability to make hormones or control those hormone receptors. They can increase or decrease levels of hormones, which you guys all know. You guys are all sort of advanced practitioners who've done a lot of study on the body and nutrition and health. So you recognize the potential impact for increased or decreased levels of hormones on all levels. And so, like I said, hormones control all of these, everything from conception and development to metabolism and thyroid hormones, et cetera. When we're looking at things like chemical testing, so a minute ago I mentioned that, we've got these 84,000 chemicals and very few of them have been tested. When we're looking from a toxicology standpoint, so toxicologists are scientists that study the role of toxic chemicals and their impact in the body, their model of research typically looks at very high doses of exposure, thousands of times what we get in a normal, everyday situation. When we are talking about how we're exposed daily to chemicals in our shampoo and our laundry detergent and the scented Febreze air fresheners and Glade plugins and all of that garbage, the chemical companies that manufacture those products or the ingredients in those products will often say things like, the amount that you're getting is so small it doesn't actually matter. It doesn't matter. And when that argument comes up, I usually say two things. One, okay, maybe you're right, even though I know that you're not, but even if you were right, I'm not exposed to just one chemical per day. I'm actually exposed to hundreds of chemicals per day, and those small amounts can actually add up to be quite meaningful. And so this idea that the dosage matters, meaning that the small amount is insignificant, is referred to as the dose makes the poison argument. And this basically says that, really small amounts of things don't have a big impact, and big amounts of things have a big impact. And this is where usually people will say, very frustrating when they hear them say this, even water can kill you if you have too much of it. So what they're doing in making statements like that, and I'm sure, Reed, that you've heard and seen those kinds of arguments out in the world.
All the time.
All the time. And so when people are making those kinds of statements, essentially what they're saying is that it's the dose that matters. Water is not harmful in small amounts. In fact, it's helpful. But in large doses, it can kill you. It can drown you. It can completely, dilute your salt levels in your body, can have really detrimental effects. So that concept of a little exposure doesn't hurt us and a large exposure does hurt us is what the entire foundation of our toxicological research is based on. That's how toxicology studies are done. And what happens is, so there is a, so we're going to get a little bit nerdy here, so brace yourselves.
Yeah.
So in research studies, and we're looking at what are called dose-response curves, meaning how does the response change in relation to the dosage changing. And when we're looking at the dose makes the poison assumption, it follows what's called a monotonic dose-response curve. And so what that means is that as the dosage increases, the response either increases or decreases, but in a steady direction. So if we're looking at like an XY graph, a monotonic dose-response curve is a straight line going either from the left to the right, going up, or going down. It's a straight line, it doesn't change. Meaning, that's what's referred to as a monotonic dose-response curve. And toxicologists assume, emphasis on the word assume, that all chemicals follow that same path. They either increase or decrease. The response will either increase or decrease as the dosage changes. Now, when we're looking at endocrine disrupting chemicals, they don't always behave in that way. And this is where we have a big education gap and learning gap when it comes to the toxicity of things. And so a lot of endocrine disruptors follow what's called a non-monotonic dose-response curve. And so on a typical XY axis, what that might look like, instead of a straight line, is a U-shape or a bell-shaped line, or it could even be an undulating line, which means that as that dosage changes, the response can either go up or down in any direction that it so chooses. And so what that tells us is that we can't assume that small doses, meaning that spot on the XY graph that's closest to the axis, we can't assume that a small dose is going to have a small impact because that undulating line can go anywhere that it wants. And so what we find is that with endocrine disrupting chemicals, those really low doses are extremely impactful on the body. And we know this because our endocrine system is designed to respond to infinitesimally small levels of hormone in the body. When we go through puberty, when we are sending out pregnancy hormones, when any kind of hormonal shift is happening in the body, what's happening is parts per billion or parts per trillion doses of hormone are being released, and the body responds in a really dramatic way. Pregnancy is not a small hormonal change or developmental change, yet it's at puberty, right? We all know how insane people get during puberty, and those are in action, parts per trillion doses of hormones being released. So every endocrinologist in the world and every pharmacologist in the world understands that low doses matter. So most of the prescription drugs that we get are delivered in the body in these infinitesimally small parts per billion, parts per million, parts per trillion doses. And we know they work. Birth control is delivered in, I think it's NuvaRing, which is one of the most popular birth control products out there. The dose that's delivered is 0.035 parts per million. And it has the ability to, at that extremely small dosage, it has the ability to completely alter our menstruation cycles.
Mm-hmm.
So, dramatic effects. The other example that I usually give, and I can't remember the exact dosage, is, I jokingly share this one. This was something that the founder of the Environmental Working Group has shared during his presentations, and he's a funny guy, is Cialis, the erectile dysfunction drug, right? That has a pretty dramatic effect on the body. right? But the dosage that we're getting is infinitesimally small. It's something like, 3 parts per million. It's very, very, very small. And so to give you some perspective of what that parts per million means, 1 part per million, 1 part per billion is the equivalent of just under 1 teaspoon that's diluted in a 600,000-gallon Olympic-sized swimming pool. So if our bodies are an Olympic-sized swimming pool and somebody drops less than 1 teaspoon of something into that body, it can have a dramatic effect. Effect on the body. So that's a visual aid that I like to share with my clients, but also encourage them to share with their clients, meaning your clients, because you need to get them to understand that small doses matter, or you may need to. So, and that's really the difference between toxicology, pharmacology, and endocrinology. Is pharmacology and endocrinology understand this concept. Toxicology does not. They refuse to embrace that. However, all of our regulatory decisions about chemicals and commerce come from toxicologists. So this is why we have such a big problem here in this country. It's a global issue, but it's pretty bad here in the U.S. So like I said, these endocrine disruptors can have a really dramatic effect on reproduction, on metabolism. Read, like you said, of any practitioners out there who are working with whether it's a preconception audience, a prenatal audience, families with young children, this is the most critical thing to address with them. If environmental chemicals like pesticides in the food that we're eating, pesticides in the water that we're drinking, can impact the outcome of a developing child, parents need to address it. It can this window of preconception and fetal development is the most sensitive. And we have to consider all of our organ systems and neurological systems are in development. And so any chemicals that are going to interfere with the development of the brain, the neurological system, the immune system, the digestive system, the hormonal system, can lead to really adverse outcomes, not only for the child in its infancy, meaning there can be a birth defect, but these early exposures can actually increase their risk for disease rates in adulthood. So, as we're working with clients now who are struggling with diabetes or heart disease or excess weight or thyroid hormone problems, some of what we might be sort of fighting against, so to speak, is what happens to that human being while they were still in utero. Right? So this is sort of sets us up, and that's why I think it's really important for, as practitioners, for us to sort of intervene as early on in the process as possible. There's an enormous connection between endocrine disruptors, these environmental chemicals, with metabolic issues, which is regulated by our endocrine system. So things like weight gain, resistant weight loss, insulin resistance, diabetes, and obesity. There's an entire class of chemicals, most of which are endocrine disruptors, that are referred to as obesogens. They're obesogenic chemicals. They're linked to obesity. And I'm actually, later this month, and I think, Reed, you're going to send some emails out to your audience, but later this month, I'm actually doing a special class on obesogenic chemicals. We can send out details on that later. But, each one of these subjects, whether it's endocrine disruptors or obesogens or fertility, can be something that we explore for hours and hours. So I'm going to keep us focused on the endocrine disruptors. So that's what endocrine disruptors are. But where are they in our daily lives? Meaning, where can we start turning our attention? Because that's ultimately the aim here, is just in the same way that you're working with patients on making shifts in what you're eating and lifestyle changes and sleeping better and reducing stress. This is one of those stressors. Toxins are a stressor. And so we want to just reduce them, exposure to them as much as possible. So, like I said, they're everywhere, but that's overwhelming, and that's anxiety-producing for all of us, oh, my God. I can't do anything about it. And we don't want to have that kind of response. So what I prefer to do is really, in my practice, is help practitioners focus on the ones that are actionable, meaning what are the ones that we can actually do something about. So my motto on that is to change the things that we can control so we worry less about the ones that we can't, because there's a lot that we can't. I drive in my car. My car has chemicals in the construction of that vehicle that I'm exposed to every time I drive it. But I still need to get places. Still need to go places in my car. So I don't want to be a sort of neurotic, crazy person in the world and not walk down the street on the sidewalk because there's chemicals coming from cars. So I'm going to focus on the things that I can do. And that gives me a little bit of breathing room, so to speak, to not really worry about all that other stuff out there, which is, from a stress reduction standpoint, is really important. It's just really important. Stress is a toxin, so we don't want to fall onto that side of the line. So I emphasize on focusing on what's in our home. What are the things that we're buying and using every single day that we can make shifts around? And the first one of those is plastics. So plastics, and I'm going to kind of keep this as concise as possible because there's still a lot more stuff that I want to get to. Plastics are essentially made up of a string of polymers, and there's different, there's different types of plastics. There's clear plastics like polycarbonate plastics. There's opaque plastics. There's milky plastics. There's translucent plastics. There's flexible ones. There's rigid ones. There's all different types of plastics. And depending on the sort of, quote, recipe that a manufacturer is using, they're going to be using different chemicals to achieve those results. Regardless of what chemicals they use, the molecules that make up that plastic are not bound tightly to the actual material. So what that means is that molecules of chemicals that make up that plastic are constantly shedding or being released. And so the example that I give to illustrate this is if we think about a wire, like a cord to a lamp or some gadget, and if you look at, lamp cords from the, objects from the 60s or 70s or even 80s, those cords, which were once really soft and bendy and flexible when they were brand new, have now become brittle and hard over time. And the reason why that happens is because the chemicals that are the softeners that make up those plastics have migrated out. They just fall out. So, and then they're no longer soft and flexible. They become brittle and dry. And so that happens on car dashboards. It happens in plastics all over the place. And so when those molecules are shedding, they're shedding into our environment. So when we touch those items, we have molecules on our fingers. When we put our food inside those containers, our food becomes contaminated with these chemicals. And are they in extreme amounts? No, they're in very, very small amounts. But as we just discussed, those small amounts add up and they matter. So the example that I always give about plastics for food storage containers, I'm sure everybody's had or seen the orange stained Tupperware container that had pasta sauce or spaghetti or something like that in it once. And no matter how many times you run it through the dishwasher, it's still orange. Well, the reason for that is because the physical boundary between the plastic container and the food that came in contact with it, and in this case, pasta sauce, is blurred. And so there are certain things that can exacerbate or increase the rate at which some of those chemical molecules shed. And those are heat, oil, acidity, and abrasion. And pasta sauce is usually hot, oily, and acidic. So that's why it usually is the culprit, is some kind of tomato sauce. And what happens is, like I said, that physical line is blurred. And so the reason why your plastic container is orange and won't get clean is because some of those molecules of the sock have migrated into the physical structure of the plastic, and they stay there. So they're embedded in the plastic. Now, the inverse of that is some of the molecules from the plastic are now inside your sock. So this is just an illustrative example of how easy it is for these chemicals to migrate. And so what chemicals are we talking about? So one of these chemicals found in certain types of plastics, but definitely not all, is BPA, or bisphenol A, which I'm sure that everybody has heard of. It's sort of the poster boy for environmental chemicals because it got a tremendous amount of press when it was discovered that BPA was used in baby bottles and that this chemical was leaching into the milk that babies were drinking out of these bottles. And so there's this big uproar, and then everybody started manufacturing, quote, BPA-free plastics, and I'll get into that in just a second. So BPA, bisphenol A, is an endocrine disrupting chemical. It is an estrogen mimic. So it mimics estrogen in the body, and it can block or interfere with estrogen hormones. Because of that, it's linked to breast cancer. It's linked to reproductive problems in both males and females. It's linked to weight gain, insulin resistance, diabetes, and obesity. It's been associated with heart disease, developmental issues, and even gender behavioral issues, which is a really fascinating area of research that looks at the behavior of children that's appropriate for their gender, and that some of those lines are getting blurred because we have hormones that are interfering with fetal development during stages of sexual differentiation. So during the window when a fetus is becoming female or male, think about this. Any interference in this process is very likely going to result in some altered outcomes once that child is born and developing. And so when we're looking at, the increase in even subjects like transgender community, there's some really, really early research that's looking at, where is this stemming from? Because, yes, transgender has always been something that's just been around, but it seems that certainly culturally seems to be increasing. So there's just this fascinating field of research, and bisphenol A is one of those endocrine disrupting chemicals that is being discussed in those circles. So in developmental and behavioral issues, things like anxiety, depression, anger, aggression in children, BPA is linked to increases or decreases in those. It's linked to decreases in IQ in children. Even a few IQ points can have a dramatic effect. BPA has been, a couple recent studies have looked at BPA and its ability to block the effects of the breast cancer drug tamoxifen, interestingly. It works on the same exact receptors as tamoxifen, but it can actually block the efficacy of that drug. Which makes sense because breast cancer is typically an estrogen-dominant disease. Now, BPA has been found in 93% of people tested by the CDC. It's ubiquitous. So anything that we can do to reduce our exposures are important. So where is BPA found in our homes? One, it's found in polycarbonate plastic. It's not found in Ziploc bags, which is a soft plastic. BPA is an ingredient in plastics designed to make it rigid and shatterproof. So if we're thinking about things like our Vitamix containers or our food processor bowls or our Nalgene water bottles or our Brita water pitchers, that clear, hard plastic, that is polycarbonate plastic that's typically made with BPA. Other types of plastics, meaning your disposable Glad Tupperware containers, won't be made with BPA, but they can still release other chemicals that exhibit what's called estrogenic activity. So there are studies that have looked at all types of plastics and found that all types of plastics release some degree of estrogenic compounds. So the general rule is to reduce exposure to plastics in the kitchen when they come in contact with food. So that's sort of the general rule, because plastic, we can't avoid plastic altogether everywhere. That's not possible. Mm-hmm. So we do what we can. So BPA is also found in the lining of canned food. So whether it's canned soup or beer or an organic soda or a can of organic tomatoes, BPA is used in the lining of canned food. So I encourage people to reduce the use of canned foods. There are a few companies that use a different type of lining inside their can that is an enamel-based lining that does not include chemicals that leach, like Eden Organics, for example, is one of those brands. So the next area that, and we're getting close to moving into Q&A time, so I'm going to kind of speed it up. But the next area that I think is sort of the biggest bang for your buck if you're going to work with clients on reducing endocrine disruptors in their home, it's looking at the fragranced items that are in their home. So fragrance items, whether it's perfume or shampoo or air fresheners or dish soap or any other kind of household cleaners, fragrances are typically made with a chemical called phthalates, and it's spelled Phthalates, but it's pronounced phthalates with a TH. Phthalates are also ubiquitous. They're found in, I believe, 98% of people that were tested by the CDC because they are in such a wide range of consumer products. In personal care products and any products where fragrance is included, the phthalates act as a fixative and a stabilizer for both color and fragrance. There's all these new products. I just saw a commercial on TV for some body lotion that has fragrance release beads that, these little beads pop open and release fragrance all day long on your skin, which to me, I just go, huge red flag. Those are just phthalates. That's terrible. They probably just jacked up the amount of phthalates in their product. Who knows? Phthalates are also used as a plasticizer to make plastics soft and flexible. So if we think of things like our shower curtain and that really stinky plastic smell that comes from a plastic vinyl shower curtain, that's phthalates that you're smelling. You're smelling phthalates and you're inhaling those molecules, and they're going directly into the body. So we want to be reduce the use of sticky plastics is one way to put it. But really looking at reducing any ingredient label that has the word fragrance is going to be a red flag that phthalates are going to be present. Obviously, that's a big area for people to work in, but I always encourage clients to take it one thing at a time. Let's start with our shampoos and our body lotions, and let's find more natural alternatives. Let's then move on to our makeup, then let's look at our air fresheners or our household cleaners. So one category at a time. And the last one that I would really recommend people to address, practitioners to address is, of course, pesticides, meaning encouraging clients to be eating organically as much as possible. Organophosphate pesticides, which is the largest class of pesticides that are used, are linked to everything from neurological impacts to behavioral problems, infertility, cancer, altered thyroid hormones, reduced testosterone. They're wide-ranging. They are endocrine disruptors. They are also carcinogens. They are also neurotoxins. And this is one of those things where if we need another reason to have the discussion about the importance of organics with our clients, then this is it. That's the reason. I see a lot of practitioners running detoxes and cleanses, and strangely, they seem to overlook the discussion of organic foods during your detox or cleanse. Again, the overall goal here is to help clients take individual steps one at a time. It's a process to reduce that body burden. Now, for some people, if you've got an autoimmune condition or if you have somebody that has asthma or allergies, reducing for example, phthalates in your home that are fragrance items can actually have a very short-term, immediate, noticeable, measurable impact on their symptoms. But for some people, it's not an immediate overnight reduction in symptoms. So a lot of what we're doing here is preventative in nature, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Awesome. So I know we're at the 45-minute mark, but I just want to mention real briefly that one of the things that's important is how we talk about this stuff to clients, because it can be overwhelming to them, and we certainly don't want to scare them or come from a sensational standpoint. So what I always encourage my clients to do is create what I call a bridge of relatability. Clients have thyroid conditions. You say, I'm going to talk about these chemicals that impact your thyroid, and then they're going to be more open to talking about, like, shampoo or dishwashing detergent, when otherwise that may not have any sense in what you're working with them on. So always create a container for them and a bridge. So contextualize and connect this conversation around environmental health with the reason why they're coming to see you in the first place. Otherwise, they may not understand that their shampoo has anything to do with the weight that they can't lose, for example. So, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that, or thoughts or questions. If you had anything, Reed.
Well, it's a lot. I'd like to open up for questions. Hopefully somebody will raise their hand. Just press number 1, raise your hand. But, I think I just, I mean, obviously chemicals are ubiquitous. You said there's 84,000 in use. I know, I believe that, easily. They're used in every business and commerce and from food production and clothing production and furniture production and household production and farming and, pharmaceuticals and you name it. So they are, the term is ubiquitous, they're just everywhere. So, and I get the fact that dosage sometimes doesn't matter. There's a little poison in every pill. That's what I've heard doctors on TV say about medicine. There's a little poison in every pill. So, dose is important when it comes to medication. The reason that doctors have a license is so that they can prescribe medication. Now, why do you need a license? Is it because of the amount of good or the amount of bad?
No, it's because of the amount of potential harm.
Exactly. You need a license. It's just like you need a license to carry a gun. You need a license to prescribe meds because they can kill you.
Yeah.
And I mean, just like you said, they all are poisonous, and it's a matter of dosage. But what I think you brought to light that I appreciate is that some of this stuff, there is no tolerable amount. There's no tolerable amount. Now, we have some really toxic stuff out there, even natural. Cesium.
Even natural. So, lead, for example, is a naturally occurring substance.
Yeah.
And there is no level at which it's considered safe. So the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control, all state that the only acceptable level is 0. So that every test that they do where they test a smaller amount, there is still a health impact. And so, there are a lot of environmental chemicals that are, whether they're man-made or otherwise, that we're finding have similar characteristics, that no matter how small the dosage, there is still some degree of negative impact. And that's why we just need to do everything that we can to bring this conversation on a bigger scale. And like I said, I'm really, really passionate about helping practitioners develop a fluency around this, because I think it is the biggest missing piece in our conversations around health and wellness. I know that from a nutrition standpoint, practitioners often get all in a tizzy when we learn that medical doctors only get, 20 hours of training on nutrition during their entire medical career, and we think, oh my God, how could that possibly be? Well, the average medical student gets only 7 hours of training in environmental health during their entire education. 7 hours. So it's an abysmally overlooked conversation that I aim to change. And so I don't know if there's any questions are there any questions that have come in, or?
Yeah, I've got some things, and if sometimes people would get shy, or they're just
I know, I got a lot of shy guys.
overwhelmed with the information too, but Are you running labs, or you just mostly educating on what's the obvious?
So what I teach is what I call the what, where, how, and what now of environmental chemicals. What are they? How do they impact us? How do they get inside our bodies? What can we do about them? And that's sort of the what now. So what are they? Where are they? How do they impact us? And what can we do about it? So that's one of the biggest things. Like I said, there's news articles every single day talking about this stuff, but they don't talk about practical solutions. And what ends up happening is people go, okay, that's great, but what do I do when I get home? And so I want to have practitioners from a practical level understand how they can engage with clients around making changes that allow that individual to feel more empowered about the products the choices they're making out in the marketplace. That they know that the products that they're buying are, and the habits that they have, lifestyle, whatever lifestyle changes they make, are supportive of their health rather than potentially detrimental.
Let's get a question. See, we have a hand raised from the 646 area code. How you doing?
Hey guys, it's Rick Gold here. How are you?
Hey, Big Rick. How's it going, man?
Hi, Rick.
What's going on? Hey, I tuned in a little bit late, so I don't know if this was discussed or whatever. So if I'm redundant, and if it's already been said, just forgive me. But so obviously, when you're trying to detox from chemical exposure, one way to do it is to reduce your exposure to any further toxicity, right? Which is, I heard you talking a lot about that. But then the other way of kind of like pushing those detox pathways, do you have any protocols that you use specifically, not just for the for helping phase 1 and phase 2 detox in the liver, but also at the cellular level? I didn't hear that in the call, and I just may have missed it. So
that's a really great question. Thank you for that. It's a really great question, and I didn't actually get into that. So, no, I don't have a specific protocol. The way that I like to articulate this entire subject is that our bodies are like a sinking boat that has a hole in it. And we're trying to bail out the boat by detoxing or doing all this extra stuff. But until we plug that hole, meaning until we stop the flow of toxins into the body or into the boat, we can bail out forever and ever and ever. And so I really look at the first step to detoxing, just like you said, as reducing exposure. From there, yes, it's possible in some instances to do sort of forced detoxification, whether it's like chelation therapy or something like that. In many cases, I don't know if that's necessary, and in fact, it can be dangerous for certain people if their organ systems, if their liver isn't properly functioning. And so what I prefer to do for people, and this is not, my focus is really on the education of what's actually happening, and I typically will refer out to people, to other practitioners who do focus primarily on the detoxification process, is I do really encourage people to just boost the things that they're doing nutritionally every single day so that they can increase the body's ability to detox on its own. So consuming foods that are going to support the liver, that are going to allow for phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification to happen more efficiently. So that everyday stuff, whether it's, brown rice fiber or spinach or kale or green tea or antioxidants that can help with that process, whatever those things are, all of those things will work more efficiently when the flow of toxins into the body has been reduced. So it's the way that you make the detox process more powerful and more effective. Detoxing is happening all the time and I'll get into this during this call that I have later in the month on obesogenic chemicals, but there have been studies that have looked at during weight loss, during periods of extreme weight loss, for example, people who undergo gastric bypass surgery, because so many of the toxins in our bodies are stored in our body's fat tissues, the amount of circulating toxins in their bodies dramatically spikes when they start losing weight. And it's because the body doesn't know how to process those chemicals out, so they just get recycled back into the bloodstream over and over again, and it can be really, really dangerous for people. So sometimes the forced detox can actually do more harm than good, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and unfortunately we're at the end of the hour here.
Oh,
but
my goodness.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I'd like to actually have you back at some point, Lara, and
I would love to come back.
We probably could do a webinar or something. It's amazing how many of the issues that we face as FDNs are related to toxins and poisons in the environment and in the food in the world. So you really do have a great education on it. And we'll be happy to take referrals. If you want to refer people out for detox programs, we have our own, and there's a lot of ways we could work together here, Lara. So thank you so much for being on.
You are so welcome.
Yeah. All right. We're people have to move on to their next appointment. So thank you, Lara. We'll be talking again real soon. Okay.
You're welcome. Thanks, Reed.
Hey, thanks, Lara. Bye-bye.
Bye.